Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another logic video. Today we're talking about the subject of Puppet interface and, how to work with it. And in case you're wondering, this is the Puppet interface. It can be easily reached inside the Puppet logic by scoping in with L1 and X, and then just pressing it again on this little chip down here, and of course opening up the controller logic to get to it. However, there are other Puppet interfaces. There's this one, which basically does all the procedural sound effects for your walking and landing and jumping and such. And there's also one in here which controls your jump animations, And there's one in here that controls your idle, your walk, and your run and such. Interesting enough, poses are not labeled movement. I don't know why, but whatever. It's their call. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about all of these and kind of how I tend to use them. There's really no hard and fast rule for some of this, but I just want to talk about it real quick. If there is ever a point at which you want to prevent Puppet movement, just take out an empty action recorder, set it to keyframe mode, and turn this little baby off. Now your Puppet, see, can't do nothing. Can't move, can't jump. Perfect way to shut off Puppet movement. So just keep that in mind, like if you want a puppet to stand still during a cutscene or something like that, this is the way to do it. However, it will turn off some of his other behaviors. For instance, if you want him to follow something, I'm pretty sure it turns it off. I might be wrong, but let's give it a little test. Oh, actually, it doesn't turn off his follow behavior as well. Win-win, actually. Perfect for cutscenes. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, that's how I tend to use this. I don't use it for anything else. Maybe falling sometimes I'll use it. Also, I tend to put it on a different chip. Like, I'll put it inside this and maybe label it, at least this is what I do nowadays. I didn't always do that. I used to be a lot more sloppy with the logic, but I generally put it in here just in case I want to turn it and other parameters off. Like, you could put other things in here connected to switches. And that way, when you turn this off, you're also turning off those other chips at the same time. Just more efficient in general. Let's see though, what else? Here are the sound effects. I don't really tend to mess with these, but there's probably times when you're doing certain stuff that you'd want to turn this off too, usually during animations of a certain sort, if you don't want lots of mistriggered sound effects when he's stomping his feet or something. Interesting thing about these sound effects in the procedural, sound effects hooked up to the interface, is you can actually, they're dynamic and they can be changed to fit whatever. So if you set the material to grass, you'll get a grass sound effect for the jumps and the lands and everything. So these particular sound effects are somewhat unique in that regard. I guess this is how they do it. I'm not entirely sure though how they rig that up. So that remains a mystery to me. But either way, it's an interesting factoid. But yeah, not really worth mentioning. Another thing I like to do is make a separate chip called Animations. And put these two fellows in there, because it really doesn't bother to move them. If you want to move them, it's just fine. And the main reason why I do this is to clean things up. If I want to shut them both off, it's easier to do it this way, and if I want to shut them off separately, they can do it inside the chip. It's just generally more efficient to have them on a single chip. Anyway, let's get to the other stuff. Now, I haven't really opened up the Puppet interface itself much to talk about how it does what it does, but you'll notice these little foot impact, landing impact, jumped. There's these little ports running in and out of it, which you can easily access by pressing L1 and square. And you'll see all this different stuff, all these different parameters. Jumped, double jumped, predicted landing, fell out of scene. That's basically when you fall off a cliff. Distance from ground. I've actually used some of these in previous videos, so you probably know what they can do, but idle strength, movement strength, walking strength, running strength, on ground, left heel strike, right heel strike, foot impact, velocity, acceleration, deceleration, lean speed. I don't really use these other ones very much, to be honest. Foot scrape and all that, I don't really use that. They can be used, I'm just not super familiar with them. But the most basic ones we're going to see here is the jump ascent, the jump peak, and the jump descent. So when you're jumping, this is your animation. And probably if you've done a jump or two, you're like, is there any way I can get the puppet's feet to not waggle like that? Well, the good news is there is. Simply turn off poses, and you can probably get that to stop happening. Or at least drastically reduce it. See, not as much foot waggle. It doesn't look like you're running in midair anymore. Another thing to talk about puppet interfaces is this thing here is always set to springiness, which, you know, kind of affects how it looks. It'll probably look a lot stiffer. Not too bad, actually. Another interesting thing you can do with these, just on a side note, is set the slow power up and slow power down. It'll make it a little bit more gradual. But yeah, I'm just going to talk about a few handy things you can do with the jumps, and the runs, of course. The runs, that doesn't sound too good. But anyway, augmented, puppet interface stuff. Where is landing impact? Landing impact, okay. Now what I tend to do is I'll put a little deal on here. And essentially all it is it's a brief animation of your character landing, and it kind of makes it feel a little bit more realistic sometimes, or convincing. You could use it in any kind of game. It doesn't have to be, like a realistic game, but it's basically just like a little, I landed on the ground and I'm kind of hunkered down sort of thing. And you could have it just slow power up or slow power down. I think I'll try that to start with. Set it to play once, and you could even set a sound effect. I don't think you'll really have to, though, because there's already these, but if you wanted to set a sound effect, you could. Looks a little more realistic, although you'll notice that it looks less convincing when your puppet's still moving. I mean, you can kind of get away with it. But if you actually want your puppet to slow down or something, you could just turn this off briefly, just ever so slightly. It's actually barely noticeable, to be honest. Probably because it's so, But yeah, simple way to do that. And on one more little note, you may have noticed that there's actually a setting in here, if I'm not mistaken. Double jumped, which could essentially create a new animation for when you double jump. Which, if you're making a platformer, could be highly useful. So I'm going to talk about that real quick. Also, I would advise properly labeling these, but, you know, I'm just doing this very quickly to demonstrate some basic stuff. Real quick, I think we'll turn off the poses interruption. This isn't going to look super good, but it's just an idea of what you could do with the double jump. And jump descent. Okay, now let's give it a little look-see. Of course, we're going to have to go into the logic, which is L1 and square to see the puppet stuff. By the way, minimum jump height is an interesting thing. Usually you have to hold X to get a maximum jump height, but if you want your maximum height with just pressing X, go ahead and put this on 100%. Here's your double jump height. We'll make it 2. Yeah, that's what you could get away with using the puppet interface. And it's a little wonky, you know, needs a little refinement perhaps. But it's kind of neat too. One thing you could do is maybe speed it up a bit. It's too slow. If you want to do, I don't know, Luke Skywalker, making it faster is probably ideal. But that's some simple stuff concerning the puppet interface and jumping. I also want to talk about running and idles briefly, because there's some nice stuff to find out about that as well. First of all, we'll talk about idle animation. Now, there's lots of ways to do it. You can just have a simple idle pose, which needn't be too complex. That's an idle pose. And he'll just automatically relax into that. Personally, I don't like using it this way. Generally, it doesn't look that good, doesn't look very convincing, and it's kind of basic. This is what I prefer. A timeline set to loop. And I do this other timeline. It may seem a little redundant, but bear with me. Just seems to work better this way. Turn off the power. Turn on the power with the idle pose. Oh, and make sure you've gotten rid of all the puppets animations, because you don't really want that in there. All we want is for it to turn that off and on, slow power up so that there's a more gradual transition, and slow power down. You may want these to be faster or slower depending on what kind of game you're making. Yeah, let's just get ourselves a little idle pose right here. And you could make this whatever, you know, if you want him to look around or something, that could also be done. I'm not going to make him look around because that takes more frames, but... It's just a simple animation. Probably not as good as it could be, but it gets the point across. Makes it look a bit more professional, you know, like an actual video game made by somebody who knows what they're doing or whatever. And then when you run, it'll stop, and when you go idle, it'll just gradually come back in. Very nice. Very nice. It can interrupt certain, you know, if you're completely still and you use a move, it might interrupt that, but it's as simple as just turning all this stuff off, and then it won't interrupt anything. And of course, there's the running parameters, which are pretty simple, you know, that controls the puppet's run. By the way, you can actually test all of this stuff in the puppet logic. Here's the idle. Here's the walk, which currently we don't have a walk chip, so this will be blank. It's a good way to test the puppet's basic walking, you know, parameters without any animations applied. And then there's the running one, which is applied by a keyframe, and you can mess around with those so that he changes when he's running. There's also the jump. I don't really use these ones as much as the walk and the run, but, you know, it's worth mentioning. And if you want to change any of these or turn them off or set them to default, just press triangle and it'll remove the keyframe's influence on the settings. But interesting thing is if you want the walk animation to actually, you know, have a keyframe, you can connect a keyframe to it. And I guess the main advantage of this would be perhaps some transitions and stuff. But you could do that if you actually wanted to, because it's in there. Another thing I like to do is I put a little slow power up and a little slow power down on running to make it more gradual. Makes it a bit more natural. Not quite so janky. Depending on what you're doing, though, that might actually be ideal to have a quick transition from running to not running. And yeah, these are all the handy things. I might talk about a few other things. Let me look at what's in here. Predicted landing. Well, you know, there's these handy little gadgets to tell you what some of this means. Idle strength, movement strength. Oh, movement strength is interesting. One thing to note about puppets is if you go in here, you'll see these things called procedural animation, procedural walk. These two things. There's also procedural jump. I don't really use that. It'd be interesting to see what it does. But anyway, it's not the same thing as auto jump, but whatever. Procedural animations. If you turn these off, it tends to interfere with these. Like, you'll move, but a lot of those things won't be functional. The idle is still functional, though, so that's interesting. If you just want to float around, I guess that's perfect. And procedural walk, I think you'll still be able to kind of do some of this stuff, but your feet won't really move. So you'll get the animation, but nothing else. And I guess if you turn off procedural walk, you'll just sort of scoot around. But ideally, you want both of them on if you're going to do some actual trotting. Generally, though, if you turn them both off, you're kind of removing your ability to get most of these, you know. I don't even know if you can get jumps. Oh, you can get jumps. Well, that's nice. But you won't really be getting, you know, running strength or walking strength. One thing, though, I found does work, even if you turn off those two things. I don't tend to use it because it's flawed. It basically is just your raw movement strength or whatever. But it's movement strength. I tend to use a calculator so that you can have exact values for this sort of thing. But I'll show you what I mean. Movement strength actually works even if you turn off the procedurals, which I think is somewhat interesting. Greater than is what you're going to want, and make it like 0.2 for the sake of, you know, demonstration. Oh, even movement strength. Maybe they've changed it since I used it. It used to be that movement strength actually worked. Or I set the value too high, but what's the likelihood of that? Another thing is if you want to test these parameters, you can set it to remote controllable and just press play and steer them around. It's clear that nothing is going into there, so I guess movement strength is now kaputski. Doesn't work anymore. However, I bet velocity will. Or maybe I got them confused. Maybe movement strength and velocity. Just forget what I said. I think it's velocity is the thing that always works. Yeah, velocity is the thing. Because that's just your, you know, overall movement strength or whatever. Kind of weird and trippy when you don't have a possession set on. But yeah, I don't really like to use that anyway, but I just thought I'd mention it. You know, there might be certain logic that could actually be useful for. That's pretty much everything concerning the Puppet interface. It's a really handy gadget, and I encourage you to explore all of its many facets. One other thing I would like to mention is the controller sensor is directly hooked up to the Puppet interface. Here's the jump option. If you take that out, you will not be able to jump. Of course, we'll have to put this on fourth possession again. Also, we might as well put our procedurals back on. No jumping. And if you disconnect the gyroscope or the lean speed, I think it'll take motion sensor movement off completely. Fine. Yep, it's all gone. Which is kind of a good thing. I don't like the motion sensor movement. It's in here if you ever want to, you know, if you ever have your puppet leaning with the controller's gyro, just turn that right off. Handy little tip. Also, turn off auto look if you don't want him looking at your imp during gameplay or whatever. Of course, I think he only does that if he has this on. Oh, it's if you press play. If you press play, he'll look at the imp, and it's kind of annoying because he'll change his animations and things. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. But basically, this is how you directly interface with the interface, as it were. Take out the left stick, and he can't even move. This is a good way, though, that if you wanted to reroute how things work, you could potentially, you know, hook up the D-pad to the walk cycle and, you know, these other things. Like if you wanted up on the D-pad to make you jump or something, or you wanted to create a 2D side-scroller using the D-pad. Now, hooking it up to walk would be pretty tricky. It'd probably require a lot of extra gadgets to calculate that, but I'm just giving you an idea of what's possible. I'm using the D-pad to make him jump. So if you ever wanted, you know, or maybe you want triangle to make him jump, or just a different button than X, that's how you do it. Just connect that right there. And we may talk about this sometime, which is fell out of scene. Like if you want to make custom falling animations and stuff that are really cool, I'll talk about that sometime. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. If you would like to support us financially, consider clicking the join button to become a member and unlock perks. You can also leave a super thanks in the comments, which we would appreciate, or a one-time donation on Ko-fi, link in the description. That's all for now. Goodbye.